Up to me, he goes, bro, what's the one thing you've learned from Melbourne? I was like, that's a long list, bro. That's not one thing. And so I had to sit down and actually think about it. And there's a few different things that I've kind of been able to get, some small lessons here and there, from the Melbourne weather. It's so unpredictable that I've learned to be prepared for any situation, any day.
Yep. That's true.
Living in such a multicultural house, we've got Africans, Samoans, Chinese, Macau Australians. It's taught me to really learn to be more considerate towards different cultures. Even for some of us, we have different financial situations. We have to be aware of who's in what situation, what position. Working in the cyber ministry and building up the cyber ministry from the ground up. When I was in Sydney, I took over this team. I had 10 people. I was put in charge of it. I had a team. I had professional photographers. I had people who built the website from the ground up. So I just came in and I said, all right, guys, I want this. Boom, they made it. It was super easy. Coming into Melbourne, I had to learn to do it all myself. I had to learn how to do these things. I really want to lift up Wayne, actually. I think it's been really awesome having Wayne as like a right-hand man. He's helped out with the recording of every sermon. He's recording it right now. Thank you, Wayne. And every Sunday, every Wednesday, he'll record the lesson, and he always puts it up online. I don't have to worry about YouTube, so I really do appreciate that. It is a massive load off. And it's all of his cameras and gear. He really has all the gear. He is the Master Wayne. Playing Risk with the boys.
Yeah.
Finding out that I win whenever Emmanuel's not around. Just saying the challenge is out to you guys. But it's taught me that the loudest people can be the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
Playing Risk with the boys, I've had to learn to control my emotions better. I used to play a particular way. Someone attacks me, I'm going for their life. It would work until I went for their life, and then when I was weak, everyone else went. you know that meme? It's free real estate. I became the free real estate, and I always lost. I even had to change my strategies, the way that I would play, to adjust to the people that I was playing with. Or having to song lead. Teaching me to get comfortable doing something that I'm very uncomfortable with. But each of these things, I could keep going. I actually had to stop. I was like, all right, I gotta stop, otherwise I'll do the whole sermon on just different lessons. But each of these things taught me one particular lesson. They all came down to one single lesson. And that is, if I'm not centered on Christ, then all these things become impossible to keep up with. If I'm not centered on Christ, it's impossible to keep up with it. That is the overall lesson that I've learned during my time here in Melbourne, even leading up to the mission team coming here to Melbourne. And so I'm really going to be sharing with you guys a bit of the story of the year leading up to the mission team being sent out, the lessons that God was teaching me, and the lessons that I've learned being here on Melbourne, and how it's really changed the way that I view my relationship with God. But I thought of giving you guys an example. Being centered on Christ. What does that mean? Being centered on Christ. Who's played sports? We got some sports players.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have ever played rugby, but I used to play junior professional. So I played for the junior Brumbies. And we used to we'd have these camps. We trained with the Brumbies. These guys are massive. They're huge fellas. And we'd have this one drill where we'd line up in this line. And they'd have a player, he'd be a couple of feet taller than Emmanuel, built like Emmanuel, massive dude, comes up and he just pushes you. Most of the guys just fall over backwards, right? And he just comes up and he pushes you. And then some of the players thought, when I get pushed, I'll just step back on my foot. And as they pushed, they'd end up hurting their ankles, their Achilles, their calves. They got a lot of injuries because they put all of their body's weight onto that one point very, very quickly. There was this one guy, his name was Max. We called him the Wombat. And we called him the Wombat because he was big and he was short. And he was like, his center of gravity was just something else. But this guy, when someone came to push him, he just squatted down. The guy pushed him, he didn't move. I was sitting there being like, how does that work? But I tried it. So I squatted down. And I realized as you squat down, your center of gravity is lower. You're in a position where when things come against you, The weight is better balanced against your legs, your back, your core. And so what happens is, as the pressure of this person pushing you, or the pressure of life coming against you, you're suddenly in a position to take it. But a lot of players put it on their own pride. They put all the weight on themselves. And I realized that was the perfect example. Whenever I try to live life with my own strength, what would happen? It's like putting my foot, all the weight on my own back foot. And I just hurt myself. And then I hurt other people. Poor Emmanuel has had to deal with it for years. But what I've been learning over this time in Melbourne is, as I center my life on Christ, as I kind of bunker down, I'm like, all right, it doesn't matter what's going on around me. Everything's about Jesus. What happens is, as life's pressures come against me, it makes it easier to handle the weight, handle the pressure. It doesn't mean it's not there. It means I can handle it. So I've got just 2 simple points. I'm going to point number 1. I'm not as strong as I thought I was.
Bars.
You know, I was thinking of the title for this point, and I initially wrote, I'm not Batman. You know, Batman's one of my favorite heroes. He's strong, he's powerful, he's smart, but he doesn't need superpowers to be able to do what he needs to. I was like, man, I wish I was Batman, but I'm not Batman. I remember when I went back to Sydney just a few weeks ago actually, it was a couple months ago actually, man, time flies. But I went back to Sydney, and the guy who leads our church in Sydney came up to me and goes, hey Chris, how's Melbourne? And the first thing that came out of my mouth was, I'm not as strong as I thought I was. I was shocked. I was mind blown. I was like, man, what has hit me? I was like, I did not expect it to be like that. We even had short talks preparing us for the mission team. We had short talks preparing us for what is it like to be a Christian in a small church. They're like, all your sin comes out and this and that. And I was like, I can take it. I can do it. I can step on my foot. And it didn't go so well. When I was initially put on the mission team, I thought that I could do it. So I started off just taking on anything that I was given. Man, I said, hey bro, can you do this? Yeah, no worries. I'll do it. I can do it. Now, saying yes is not a problem. But the problem that I had was I didn't then go and ask for advice. If I didn't know how to do something, I'd say, yeah, no worries. And then I'd be trying to Google it, YouTube it, figure it out, and then I wouldn't do it quick enough, and then it'd put other people off, and it caused a lot of trouble. I had a lot of pride coming into the mission team that really held the cyber ministry back. The cyber ministry is everything, Instagram, YouTube, the website. I really held a lot of things back. Even with the household, I really disunified the household for a long time. I didn't know how to connect with each of the guys and to bring the guys together because I didn't ask for help. Because I thought, no, I can do it. I'm gonna be like Batman. I'll figure it out. That was the mindset that I had. But it wasn't sustainable, and it ended up just causing a lot of problems. But leading up to the mission team, so we're going back to 2023, all the way back to February. At this point, I was leading the cyber ministry for Sydney. It's a big shot. Yeah, you can tell my pride was a bit up there. I was dating, rubbing it into all the single brothers. I'm dating, you're not. Sucks to be you guys, man. You guys should get a girlfriend. So all those little jabs of, hey bro, why aren't you dating yet? Man, if I can date, you can date.
Tell us, bro.
I was leading a Bible talk. I was leading a household. I had all the titles that I could possibly want. But the problem was, I didn't have a great relationship with God. And God knew he had to deal with that. And so in preparing me for the mission team, and to be honest, saving me from, making sure that I get to heaven, saving me from my own sin, God took me through the roughest year I've ever been through. In February, I went through a breakup. This brought out a lot of deep emotions and hurt. Before I was a Christian, I had serious issues with women. I'd had a few breakups, and it really caused some deep, deep struggles. There was a lot of trust issues. And I thought, Christian women, they're different. They're completely different. But then I went through this breakup, and I started to fall back into that pattern of thinking of, marriage isn't safe. I can't trust the women. I can't even share my feelings or anything. I can't get close to them, can't get attached. And it created this deep gap between me and God. You might think, why me and God? But it was because I was tearing myself away from his daughters. I was going, your daughters aren't what you say they are, because I've been emotionally hurt. I actually really want to lift up Eric. Eric was the guy, he started coaching me, or what we call discipling me, from, I think it was March onwards or April onwards. And it took a lot of time and a lot of effort, and he used to pull me aside multiple times a week. He'd be like, hey bro, how you doing? And we'd start talking things through, and I started getting open about stuff. But it was really hard. There was a lot of hurt that just stuck a knife in. In that same month, I was told that one of the guys who was younger than me as a Christian, as a younger guy, he was going to start leading the house. And the initial statement was, well, he needs to learn how to lead the house. In my pride, I took that as a, wow, they're taking it away from me, because if I'm not good enough to date, I'm not good enough to lead a house. And I got really bitter towards God and towards leaders and people. And my sin just started to come out. But God knew what he was doing in that time. It was a process, but he never pushed me so far that I broke. He just pushed me enough to draw out my sin so I could deal with it. Just a couple months later, we had this conference. It was awesome. It was probably the cyber ministry's biggest victory. We had split services at different venues. We trained for it. Everything went perfectly. Any problem that came up, we dealt with it straight away. We were prepared. It was awesome. But then all my best friends went away on mission teams. Emmanuel and Effie, they went to Samoa. Juju, he went back to Samoa close to that time. Some of my closest friends that I first became Christians with, they were my buddies. They moved to different, went to Hong Kong and different cities. And suddenly I was left in a place where I was feeling a lot of hurt. I was having to try and deal with a lot of emotions. And suddenly I didn't have best friends to go and hang out with or talk to. But it really taught me that looking back now, that I didn't build great friendships with everybody that I came in contact with. I was very reserved with the people around me. And so God was just revealing more of my sin. Again, a couple of months later, my grandfather passed away. He was in his late 80s. He fought in Vietnam. He'd lived quite an incredible life. The funeral itself was really beautiful. It was very nice going and seeing the family. Everyone celebrated. It was a sad moment on the day, but the celebration of his life was incredible. But I remember looking around, and there was probably about 50 or 60 family members at the wake afterwards. And I remember looking around going, man, only one of my cousins is saved. No one else is currently saved. No one knows the truth. And it kind of just reminded me of one of the initial reasons why I became a Christian. Man, I want to see people saved. I want to see people who know the truth. Mm-hmm. But now I had this issue, there was kind of this gap. Because I started to remember why I wanted to be a Christian. And I started to see what God was doing in the beginning. But then I was not dealing with my sin. I still had a lot of emotions. I was still bitter towards God and my leaders, and I was really struggling. During that time, I'd been fruitful a couple of times. Over the months, I'd studied the Bible with people, they got baptized, it was awesome. And then both these guys fell away. And so I started to question, am I not able to be fruitful? Am I still really a disciple? What's going on here? I started to reach out to God. I was like, God, what's going on, man? Like, you're taking everything from me. It's not fair. Man, I went right back to those teenage years. I don't know if you guys remember your teenage years. We'd be like, this isn't fair. I shouldn't have to do the dishes, and why is mom getting me to do the washing? And
still happens, bro.
Still happens. But I started to go back to that. I was like, God, why? This isn't fair. Why don't I have this and that? But then in September, I think this was the point that it really hit. In September, my aunt passed away. She'd just hit 40. So she'd missed a lot of potential life. And I remember going to the funeral, and again, seeing all these family members coming together. It wasn't quite as joyous occasion. Mm. And I remember going up to her coffin. We had the ceremony, and I remember the coffin was out for us we had these pens, we were able to go and write a message on the coffin. It was really quite lovely. I remember going up and I just thought to myself, I knew she hadn't chosen God. But I thought I could have asked her at least one more time. I could have invited her to study the Bible just one more time. And so I remember I wrote down, I said, I'm sorry. I'll give more of an effort for the rest of the family. And so on the trip back to Sydney, I then drove back up to Sydney with Joe and his wife, Kerry. They lead the church in Sydney. They drove me back that day, and I remember sitting in the car thinking, going, wow, Jesus went through this. The breakup, I felt betrayed. That's where a lot of the hurt came from. Oh man, Jesus was literally betrayed. Like Judas sold him out. He got, beat up and killed over it. Like it's a bit more serious than a breakup. I'd had friends left. Man, all of Jesus' friends left. Just when he needed them. I had people passed away. Jesus had people pass away. He lost family. He lost friends. And I started to connect the pain that I was going through was a lesson from God of everything that Jesus went through. And it was to try and draw me closer to God, not further from him. He's trying to go, hey, you've gotten so big on these titles, so big on what you had, that I'd gotten disconnected from my relationship with God. And I started to understand just how weak I was and how much I needed God. And that was a moment, because I don't like to admit that I'm weak. I really don't. But I had to go, man, I'm really weak. I need help. And so I started to dig into the scriptures and hold on to particular scriptures. I live in Romans 8:28. It says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love, who have been called according to his purpose. And in Psalm 62 verse 6, this was probably one that I read almost every day. It said, truly he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will not be shaken. And I used to take that, I'd be like, man, I've already been shaken, but I still have God. So I'm still okay. See, God took me through challenge after challenge to show me how much I needed him. God doesn't shy away from us getting hurt. He isn't sentimental in that way. God's focus is to get you to heaven. It doesn't matter what it's going to take to get you there. God's focus is to get you to heaven. There's no point you having this awesome, luxurious life or the perfect life with no pain if your spiritual life is there. His goal is to get you to heaven. So you can either learn the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is you get into the Bible, you go, the Bible says this, I'm going to do it. And it generally works out pretty well. The hard way is you get into the Bible, you go, the Bible says that, but, and I always used to do that. I learned the hard way. I'd be like, well, the Bible says this, but I've been thinking about it. I remember phone conversations with Emmanuel where he's like, bro, the scriptures say this, we gotta go and do it. I'd be like, oh, but if you think about it, this and that, and I give him all this logic and reason and this, and I'd be like, so that's why I should clean my room first before I evangelize at all. And he was like, bro, that's not in the scriptures. He's like, evangelism's in the scriptures. Seeking and saving the lost, loving people. Cleaning the bedroom, it's important, but it's not, you might have your priorities. I'm like, no, bro, you gotta get this. I used to use logic. So I had chosen to learn the hard way. In 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 3 to 6, it says, this is good and pleases God our Savior, who wants all people to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. For there is one God and one mediator between God and mankind, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself as a ransom for all people. This has now been witnessed to it at the proper time. See, God wants every person to be saved. That's his goal, is for everyone to get to heaven. That's what God desires. And so I started to click that I was like, oh man, okay, I'm starting to understand the reason why I'm a Christian. I went through a year of just beating after beating after. It felt like every month something was going wrong. And I started to feel incredibly lonely. I started to feel incredibly separated from people, separated from God. But once I started to click that God's purpose was to get me to heaven and then to use me to get other people to heaven, I started to really go, man, I really need God. Now, when I arrived in Melbourne, this is coming December, it was December 4th, I remember coming down early. I was here for a few weeks ahead of the rest of the team, but there was still a little bit more sin. So I'd gotten to this place, I was like, I started to realize, okay, I'm realizing how much I need God. I'm starting to have, better quiet times. In the morning I was like getting into the scriptures. I was like, all right, I really, really got to get into this relationship with God. But there was still some sin to deal with, and even just my thought process had to be changed a bit. And so God went through basically the same process. In the previous year, it had been some big hits, but now it was real small things that just really got to me. The first thing I noticed, I moved into where Emmanuel and Effie are now living, and the place had been ransacked. It had been lived in with squatters, there's holes in the walls, pipes had been cut, all kinds of stuff. But it's a friend's house, and so that he was like, hey, if you guys fix it up, you can live there for free, not a problem. And so I went down and I was staying there, and the first thing I noticed was there was no hot water. Which, when you travel from Sydney to Melbourne on a train, you're like, at least I'm gonna get a hot shower. No hot water. Man, I was pretty shocked. I even remember I hopped in the shower and went, doesn't matter, cold water, I'll do it. But Sydney cold water and Melbourne cold water, these are two, it's like night and day. It's like sin and righteousness. Man, Sydney cold water, I've now come to learn, is lukewarm water. Melbourne cold water is ice cold water. So I hopped in the shower one time, I'm like, doesn't matter, I hopped in, and I'm just pushing through. I'm like, cold water, it's great for you. I'd watched a whole bunch of videos on the effects of cold water on the body, and happy to talk to you afterwards. It is actually great for you. But after a few minutes, I started to notice, I was like, man, I'm a little bit short on breath, and I'm feeling a little bit dizzy, and I can't see straight. And then I started, I'm like, I'm going into shock. Taking a shower and I'm going into shock because it's just so cold. So I hopped out of the shower, grabbed the towel, I'm like trying to then jog on the spot, and I'm like dancing around the bathroom. Probably looked like a fool, but luckily no one else was around. But I was like, man, no hot water. Then there was no gas, no stove to cook with. Now for those who know me, I love to cook. So imagine me unable to cook anything. I couldn't cook at all. Now at first I was like, awesome, I'm just gonna Uber Eats food all day. I have the excuse now to just Uber food every meal. But I think after breakfast, lunch, and dinner of McDonald's and burgers and pizza for about 3 days, I was like, I'm done. I just want to cook like a fresh meal. I can't do this greasy food anymore. I just can't do it. But I had to endure that for another three weeks. Then there was no washing machine. So I had to hand wash my clothes in ice water, by the way. This wasn't lukewarm water, it was ice water. So I'm sitting there scrubbing my clothes, and then my hands start aching, and then they start really hurting. Then they start going numb, and I'm trying to hold the soap. And it's I was just like, this is ridiculous. I didn't have a comfortable bed. I had just this mattress just in the middle of the living room. There was little shards of glass in the carpet that I had to vacuum out time and time again. It was bad. And what I started to see was that God had taken away just little comforts. Little hot shower. No cooking. You got to do your own laundry. And just more sin I started calling out Maddie. I'm like, bro, I'm in sin. I did this, I did that. Man, I struggled with purity. It hit me like a ton of bricks. It all came back, all my struggles. All the desires that I'd been working to deal with, it just all came back. And I started to see that what I'd been doing my whole life was I was living for God, in a sense, in my mind. I was like, I'm a Christian, so I live for God, but my comfort and my desire was in other things. A girlfriend, a title, cooking, a hot shower. When life gets tough, I'll go take a hot shower. When life gets tough, I'll message the girlfriend. When things aren't easy, I'll look at pornography. I'll fall into sin. I'll start binge watching TV. I'll start allowing myself to swear again. And I just backslid so far. And I went, wow, there was so much that God had to dig out. And it took him a full year to do it. A year of just hit after hit. And I thought it wasn't fair. Once I started to see that, I realized how much of a fake Christian I'd been. I'd built my life as a disciple around all these titles, the things that I could do. And so what I learned coming into the mission team was that I'm not that strong. I'm not as strong as I thought I was. Humans have this cool thing, I was studying this out. We have the ability to, in an extent, predict the future. I don't know if you've noticed, but when you're driving, you can tell, you're just like, they're about to cut into this lane. Boom, they do it. Because what's happened is, over time of driving, your brain registers, you go, when a car moves this way, it's likely to, it'll move into this lane or that lane, or you start to, as you see things, your brain is always processing. You can tell that when you tell a particular joke, you'll see how people react. And so your brain will naturally go, well, that's a good joke, well, that's a bad joke. And so you can predict, if I say this, I'll get this reaction. If I say that, I'll get that reaction. It's really incredible. And I started to have this thing where I was like, man, I'm living, the place I was at, it was like an hour and a half to work, or an hour and 20 minutes-ish. The bus only came once an hour. I was on limited funds. And so I was like, if I miss my bus, I've got to Uber to work. And that's like $70. So I was like, I can only do that so many times, especially because I'm Ubering food like every day, multiple meals a day. And so I started to have this prediction mindset. Oh, if I go to bed too late, I can't stay up and clean the house for too long, because if I go to bed too late, then I might oversleep my 6 alarms that I set, or 7 or 8. I started to set it. I just had like this massive screen of alarms because I was afraid. I was like, what happens if I oversleep? I miss my bus. And if I miss my bus, I'm going to have to catch an Uber, and then I'll go broke, and then I'll die of starvation, and then this will happen. And it just went downhill. And so I had to start going, man, I need to trust God with the little things. We often trust God with the big things. We can be like, all right, God, like moving to Melbourne, that's a big decision. Packed up from Sydney, I was like, yeah, no worries, God. I want to go on a mission team. If I can go on a mission team for you, absolutely. I trusted God with the big thing. But I didn't trust God with the little thing, like, hey, God, can you help me wake up on time? And so I started to build this relationship with God where I started asking for help with the little things. And that comes to point number 2.
Okay.
Which is walk with God, not just for God. Walk for God. We're going to go to 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 1 to 7. That's 1 Samuel chapter 24. See, I'd gotten to this point. God had started dealing with a whole bunch of sin. He'd gotten me into this position where I was now finally getting into a state where I was ready to be a part of the mission team. I was actually ready to start participating with the mission team. But I still had to undergo a lot more training. Manuel's still been working with me. Eric's still working with me. To fine-tune areas where I've had sin that I still have to work through. Where I've had just little character areas that need to be rounded and molded. But the most important part has been refining how I view my relationship with God. See, I've always had a soldier's mindset. I'm a Christian, therefore I live for God. But then I started to ask myself the question, what does God actually need from me? I mean, if you think of it, what does God need from me? What does he need from you? If he made the universe, if he can control where money goes, he determines when things will happen, what does he need me to do? And so I started to go, hang on a second. I think I've got this backwards. And I was reading through Samuel, the story of David, and how he became king. And in chapter 24, verse 1, it goes, after Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags and the wild goats. He came to the sheep's pens along the way, and a cave was there, and Saul went to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave, and the men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, 'I will give your enemies into your hands for you to deal with as you wish.'" Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. After David was conscience-stricken for having cut off the corner of the robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord." With these words, David sharply rebuked his men, and he did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went his way. See, David made a radical decision to endure hardship with God. God had given him the choice. See, at this point in time, David would have been a better king. Saul had lost his marbles. He was chasing after David because he was afraid of David. David was a better warrior, a better leader. He already had men who would follow him to the death. Saul was really losing touch. So at this point in time, David would have had every right, for the sake of Israel, to have taken Saul's life and to become king. David had been chased by Saul unfairly, so he had every right to take Saul's life. God had positioned Saul for David to take his life. God had given him the choice. What do you want to do? It was like he just went, "Here's Saul, your choice. Do whatever." But David made the choice that he went, "No. God had chosen Saul to be king. So I'm willing to continue being chased, hiding in caves. I'm willing to continue going through the hardship with God." It was during this time when he was being chased by King Saul, most of the book of Psalms was written. Why is that? Well, it's because that's when his relationship with God was, I think, the strongest. Because he didn't care about the fame or the glory. He just cared about doing what was right. And you can see it, he was conscience-stricken the moment he cut off the robe. He was like, "What have I done? God chose this guy. I'm sorry, God. I messed up." And then he goes and rebukes his men. He's like, "Hey guys, we're wrong. This was wrong." See, often life can get chaotic or out of control. And I've often had the mindset to want to try and take things in my own control. Do you ever get, university's getting a bit busy, you've got a few different assignments, you're getting Zach up the back is starting to feel it, right? Or maybe you haven't had a job for a while. You're like, "Man, where am I going to get a job?" You're struggling with money, or maybe you're running a church and things start going astray. You often get into a position where you can get tempted to try and just take things by your own hand. "I'll just stay up all night tonight and tomorrow night. I'm just going to grind until I can get it." I remember when I was looking for a job, I got into this mindset of, well, I'm just going to do it. And I started, made my resume, started applying for job. I had this thing, I was like, if I apply for 100 plus jobs a day, I'm guaranteed to get a job pretty quickly. And I remember this was leading up to the mission team, and nothing came through for a couple of weeks. And then one day I called Emmanuel and I was like, "Bro, I'm in sin. I just realized I haven't prayed. I didn't give it to God. Feeling so great." Tell him about it. Let him know. And that's the lesson.